The Arizona desert stretched endlessly before him, a sea of sand and stone baked beneath a merciless sun. Jake Callahan wiped the sweat from his brow and squinted against the glare, his boots crunching against the parched earth as he led his horse through the shimmering heat. He had been searching for 3 days now. 3 days tracking a runaway stallion that belonged to the Morrison Ranch. 3 days with nothing but his canteen and the occasional rattlesnake for company. Most men would have turned back by now, but Jake was not most men. He had given his word, and in this unforgiving land, a man's word was the only currency that truly mattered. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains when he heard it, a sound so faint that at first he thought the heat was playing tricks on his mind. But there it was again, carried on the dry wind like a whisper from another world, a moan of pain, distinctly human, coming from somewhere among the scattered boulders to his left. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the rope coiled at his saddle, a habit born from years of unexpected encounters. He tied his horse to a twisted mesquite tree and approached the rocks with careful steps, his eyes scanning every shadow for signs of danger. What he found there would change everything. She lay crumpled against a sun-bleached boulder, her dark hair spilling across the sand like a river of midnight. Her buckskin dress was torn and dusty, and even from a distance, Jake could see the unnatural angle of her left leg. An Apache woman, young and beautiful, despite the pain etched across her face, stranded alone in the middle of nowhere. Her eyes flew open as he approached, dark pools of fear and defiance that seemed to burn right through him. She tried to push herself up, to crawl away, but the movement sent a wave of agony across her features, and she collapsed back against the rock with a sharp cry.
If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And please write in the comments where you're watching from today. It truly makes us happy to hear from you.
Jake raised his hand slowly, showing her his empty palms. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentle as morning rain. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." She watched him with the wariness of a wounded deer. Every muscle in her body tensed for flight, even though flight was impossible. When she spoke, her English was clear and precise, tinged with an accent that spoke of two worlds colliding. "Why would a white man help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a fair question, Jake thought. In these troubled times, trust between their peoples was as rare as water in the desert. But Jake had never been one to judge a person by the color of their skin or the traditions of their ancestors. He had learned long ago that kindness and cruelty existed in equal measure among all people. "Because you need help," he answered simply. "And because leaving you here would make me less of a man than my mother raised me to be." Something flickered in her eyes then, a crack in the wall of suspicion she had built around herself. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception, and whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her. "My name is Ayasha," she said finally. "It means little one in my language, though I suppose there is nothing little about my troubles now." Jake knelt beside her, careful to move slowly so as not to startle her. Up close, he could see the extent of her injuries. Her leg was definitely broken, the bone displaced beneath the swollen skin. She had been here for some time, perhaps a day or more, surviving on nothing but her own fierce determination.
"I'm Jake," he said. "Jake Callahan. Can you tell me what happened?"
Pain and something deeper crossed her face. "My people," she began, then stopped, struggling to find the words. "I was cast out. They said I had forgotten the old ways, that learning the white man's tongue had poisoned my spirit. They left me here 3 sunrises ago." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Her own people had abandoned her, left her to perish in this wasteland simply because she had tried to build a bridge between two worlds. The cruelty of it staggered him. "The nearest town is 2 days' walk from here," Jake said, glancing at her broken leg. "Maybe 3, given the circumstances. There's a doctor there who can help you." Ayasha shook her head slowly. "I cannot walk. You should go. Save yourself." But Jake was already calculating, already planning. He thought of his horse, too exhausted from days of searching to carry double weight across such rough terrain. He thought of the distance, the dangers, the 100 things that could go wrong. And then he thought of his mother's face, of the values she had instilled in him before the fever took her. He stood up and dusted off his knees. "I'm not leaving you here," he said with quiet certainty. "If you can't walk, then I'll carry you." Ayasha's eyes widened. "That is impossible. The distance alone would—" "Let me worry about what's possible," Jake interrupted gently. He walked back to his horse and retrieved his supplies, fashioning a makeshift splint from 2 straight branches and strips torn from his own spare shirt. When he returned, he knelt before her with the tenderness of someone handling something precious. "This is going to hurt," he warned her, "but I need to stabilize your leg before we can move." She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Do what you must." The next few minutes were difficult for both of them. Ayasha bit down on a strip of leather as Jake carefully aligned the bones and bound the splint in place. She made no sound beyond a muffled groan, her courage in the face of such pain filling Jake with admiration. When it was done, he helped her drink from his canteen and gave her the last of his dried meat. Then, without ceremony, he turned his back to her and crouched down.
"Climb on," he said. "We have a long way to go."
The weight of Ayasha on his back was considerable, but Jake had carried heavier burdens in his life. He had hauled sacks of grain across muddy fields, lifted fallen timber from blocked trails, and once dragged an injured calf nearly a mile back to its mother. But none of those tasks had prepared him for the strange intimacy of carrying another human being, of feeling her breath warm against his neck and her arms wrapped around his shoulders. They traveled until the sun painted the horizon in shades of orange and crimson, until the first stars began to emerge like scattered diamonds across the darkening sky. Jake's legs burned with exhaustion, and his back ached with every step, but he pressed on, driven by a determination he could not fully explain. It was Ayasha who finally spoke, her voice soft against his ear. "You must rest. Even the strongest horse cannot run forever." Jake wanted to argue, to push forward through the gathering darkness, but he knew she was right. Traveling at night in this terrain was foolish, and a twisted ankle or a fall could doom them both. He scanned the landscape and spotted a shallow cave carved into the base of a rocky outcropping, just large enough to shelter them from the cold desert night. He carried her inside and lowered her gently onto a bed of sand, his muscles screaming with relief as the weight lifted from his shoulders. The cave was dry and protected from the wind, with a narrow entrance that would be easy to watch through the night. "I need to gather wood for a fire," Jake said, already moving toward the entrance. "Will you be all right alone for a few minutes?" Ayasha nodded, though he could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. Being left alone in the darkness, even for a short time, clearly stirred memories she would rather forget. Jake worked quickly, gathering dried brush and fallen branches from the surrounding area, and soon a small fire crackled at the mouth of the cave, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. He checked her splint by the firelight, relieved to find that it had held firm during their journey. The swelling in her leg had not worsened, and the color of her skin remained healthy. With proper care, she would heal completely. "You have gentle hands for a cowboy," Ayasha observed, watching him work. "Most men of your kind are rough and careless." Jake smiled slightly at that. "My mother was a healer of sorts. She taught me that every living thing deserves tenderness, especially when it is suffering." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." The smile faded from Jake's face, replaced by a shadow of old grief. "She was. She passed 5 winters ago, along with my father and my younger sister. A fever swept through our town and took nearly half the people with it. I was the only one in my family who survived." Ayasha was quiet for a long moment. her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I am sorry," she said finally. "To lose everyone you love, that is a pain I understand too well." "Your family?" Jake asked gently. "My mother died giving birth to me. My father raised me alone, teaching me everything he knew about our people and our ways. He was a man who believed in building bridges, in understanding those who were different from us. He taught me your language, your customs, your stories." She paused, her voice growing heavy. "When he passed 2 summers ago, there was no one left to protect me from those who saw my knowledge as betrayal." Jake settled against the cave wall across from her, close enough to tend the fire, but far enough to give her space. "Is that why they cast you out? Because you learned English?" Ayasha nodded slowly. "There are those among my people who believe that any contact with your world is contamination. They said my father had poisoned my spirit, that I could never truly be one of them. When they found me teaching the children to speak your words, they decided I had gone too far." The injustice of it burned in Jake's chest. Here was a woman who had simply tried to honor her father's memory, to share knowledge that could help her people navigate an increasingly complicated world, and she had been punished for it with abandonment. "Their loss," Jake said quietly. "Any people who would throw away someone as brave and intelligent as you are fools." Ayasha looked at him with surprise, as if kindness was something she had forgotten existed. A faint blush colored her cheeks, visible even in the dim firelight, and she quickly looked away. "You barely know me," she said. "How can you say such things?" Jake considered the question carefully before answering. "In the last few hours, I have watched you endure pain that would make most men weep. I have heard you speak of your father with love and respect, even though his teachings cost you everything. And I have seen the way your eyes light up when you talk about teaching children." He shrugged. "A man can learn a lot about a person in a short time if he pays attention." The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. Outside, the desert had grown cold, but inside the cave, a different kind of warmth was beginning to build. "Tell me about your life," Ayasha said, pulling Jake's spare blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Before the fever took your family, what was it like?" And so Jake talked, sharing memories he had kept locked away for years. He told her about his mother's laughter, bright as morning bells. He told her about his father's steady hands and patient instruction. He told her about his sister's endless curiosity, how she would pepper him with questions about everything from the stars to the habits of prairie dogs. As he spoke, Ayasha listened with complete attention, her eyes never leaving his face. And somewhere in the telling, Jake realized that for the first time in 5 years, the memories did not hurt quite so much. Sharing them with someone who understood loss had transformed them from wounds into something almost beautiful. When sleep finally claimed them both, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. They were still strangers in many ways, 2 souls from different worlds thrown together by chance and circumstance. But something had shifted in that cave. Some wall had begun to crumble. Neither of them knew yet where this path would lead, but both of them sensed, in their own way, that they would never be quite the same again. Dawn broke over the desert like a promise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. Jake woke with a start, his body stiff from sleeping against the hard stone wall, and for a moment he forgot where he was. Then he saw Ayasha watching him from across the dead fire, her dark eyes curious and unreadable, and everything came rushing back. "You talk in your sleep," she said, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of her mouth. "You were asking someone to pass the biscuits." Jake felt heat rise to his cheeks. "My mother made the best biscuits in the territory." I suppose some memories never fade. He stretched his aching muscles and moved to check her leg. The splint remained secure, and though the bruising had spread, there were no signs of infection. She would need proper medical attention soon, but for now, she was stable enough to continue. They shared the last of the water from his canteen, and Jake made a mental note of the dry riverbed he had spotted the previous evening. If his memory served him correctly, there was a small spring about half a day's journey to the east, fed by underground streams that never went dry even in the harshest summers. "Ready?" he asked, crouching before her once again. Ayasha hesitated for just a moment, then wrapped her arms around his neck and allowed him to lift her onto his back. She was lighter than she had felt the day before, or perhaps Jake was simply growing accustomed to her weight. Either way, they set off into the morning with renewed determination. The desert stretched before them in waves of sand and stone, punctuated by clusters of saguaro cacti standing like silent sentinels against the brightening sky. Jake fell into a steady rhythm, his boots finding purchase on the uneven ground while his mind wandered through memories and dreams. Ayasha was quiet for the first hour, her cheek resting against his shoulder as she watched the landscape pass by. But as the sun climbed higher and the heat began to intensify, she stirred and spoke. "Jake, may I ask you something personal?" "You can ask me anything," he replied, adjusting his grip on her legs. "Why are you not married? A man like you, kind and strong and honorable, surely there are women who would want to build a life with you." The question caught him off guard, and he walked in silence for several paces before answering. "There was someone once. Her name was Catherine. We were promised to each other before the fever came. She survived, but afterward, she could not bear to look at me. She said I reminded her too much of everything she had lost." "That is a terrible thing," Ayasha said softly, "to be punished for surviving." "I do not blame her. Grief makes people do strange things. She moved back east to live with relatives, and I never saw her again." Jake paused to navigate around a cluster of rocks. "After that, I suppose I stopped looking. It seemed easier to be alone than to risk that kind of hurt again." Ayasha was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I understand that feeling. After my father died, I built walls around my heart so high that I thought no one would ever climb them." "And now?" Jake asked, his heart beating faster for reasons he did not fully understand. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Jake could feel Ayasha's breath quicken against his neck, could sense the tension in her arms as she struggled with something she wanted to say. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Then she leaned closer, her lips brushing against his ear, and spoke words that stopped him in his tracks. "I think I'm falling for you, Jake Callahan." Jake stood frozen in the middle of the desert, Ayasha's confession echoing in his mind like thunder across an empty canyon. He wanted to turn around, to look into her eyes and see if she truly meant what she had said. But before he could respond, before he could find the words to express the emotions suddenly flooding through his chest, something else caught his attention. A cloud of dust on the horizon, moving fast and growing larger with each passing second. Riders, at least 5 or 6 of them, approaching from the direction of the morning sun. "Jake?" Ayasha's voice was tight with sudden fear.
"What is it?"
He squinted against the glare, trying to make out details through the shimmering heat. The riders were still too far away to identify, but their formation was unmistakable. This was not a random group of travelers or a search party from town. "Horsemen," Jake said, his voice calm despite the alarm bells ringing in his head, "coming straight toward us." Ayasha's grip on his shoulders tightened. "My people. They have come for me." Jake scanned their surroundings quickly, searching for cover or an escape route. But they were caught in the open, exposed on all sides with nowhere to hide and no way to outrun mounted pursuers. Whatever was coming, they would have to face it together.
Hold on tight, he said, moving toward a cluster of boulders that offered at least some protection. No matter what happens next, I am not letting them take you.
Ayasha pressed her face against his back, and he felt the warmth of her tears soaking through his shirt. "I meant what I said," she whispered. "Every word." The riders emerged from the dust cloud like ghosts materializing from another world. 6 Apache warriors on horseback, their faces painted with the markings of their clan, their eyes hard and unforgiving beneath the blazing sun. They moved with the fluid grace of men born to the saddle, spreading out in a wide arc that cut off any possibility of escape. Jake lowered Ayasha gently behind the boulders, positioning himself between her and the approaching warriors. His hand moved instinctively to his belt, but he forced himself to keep his arms at his sides. Any aggressive movement now would only make things worse. The leader of the group was an older man, perhaps 50 winters by Jake's estimation, with silver streaks running through his long black hair. His face was weathered by sun and time, carved with lines that spoke of both wisdom and sorrow. He raised his hand and the other riders halted, their horses snorting and stamping in the hot sand. For a long moment, no one spoke. The desert wind whispered between them, carrying dust and tension in equal measure. Jake met the leader's gaze without flinching, standing his ground with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to hide. "You carry something that belongs to us," the leader finally said, his English accented but clear. "The woman behind you is a traitor to her people. She must return with us to face judgment."
Jake shook his head slowly. "With respect, I cannot allow that. This woman has committed no crime except trying to build understanding between our peoples. That is not betrayal. That is courage."
A murmur ran through the other warriors, and Jake saw hands tightening on weapons, but the leader raised his hand again, silencing them with a gesture. "You speak boldly for a man surrounded by enemies," he said. "Do you not understand your position? You are one man against 6 warriors. What hope do you have of stopping us?" "Maybe none," Jake admitted. "But that does not change what is right. Ayasha was left to perish in the desert, abandoned by those who should have protected her. I found her broken and alone, and I made a choice to help her. I will not abandon that choice now, no matter the odds." The leader studied him with intense scrutiny, as if trying to see beneath the surface to the truth of his character. Jake held the gaze without wavering, letting his actions speak louder than any words could. "And what is this woman to you?" the leader asked. "Why would you risk your life for a stranger from an enemy tribe?" Jake considered the question carefully. He thought of the conversations they had shared, the stories exchanged in firelight, the whispered confession that still echoed in his heart. He thought of the walls he had built around himself after losing everything, and how Ayasha had somehow begun to climb them without even trying. "She is not a stranger," he said finally. "Not anymore. And your people are not my enemies. I have no quarrel with the Apache nation. I have only a promise to keep, a promise to see this woman safely, to help." He took a deep breath and made a decision that surprised even himself. "If you insist on taking her, then you must take me as well. Where she goes, I go. Her fate is now my fate. I will not be separated from her." Silence fell over the group like a heavy blanket. The warriors exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to respond to this unexpected declaration. Even Ayasha gasped softly behind him, her hand reaching out to touch his back. "Jake, no," she whispered. "You cannot sacrifice yourself for me. You have already done too much." But Jake did not move. He stood firm as stone, his eyes locked on the leader, waiting for judgment to fall. The old warrior dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and ceremonial. He walked toward Jake with measured steps, stopping just an arm's length away. Up close, Jake could see the depth of experience in his eyes, the weight of countless decisions made and consequences borne. "You say her fate is your fate," the leader said quietly. "Do you understand what those words mean among my people? To bind yourself to another in such a way is not a small thing. It is a vow that cannot be broken."
Jake nodded. "I understand. And I meant every word."
The leader studied him for another long moment, then slowly turned to look at Ayasha. Something passed between them, some recognition that Jake could not quite decipher. "Little Ayasha," the old warrior said, his voice suddenly softer. "You have grown much since I last saw you. You have your father's eyes, and I see now that you also have his gift for finding extraordinary people." Ayasha's breath caught in her throat. "You knew my father?" "Knew him?" A ghost of a smile crossed the warrior's weathered face. "I grew up beside him. We were as brothers before life and duty pulled us down different paths. I was there when you were born, child. I held you in my arms when you were no bigger than a rabbit." Tears began to stream down Ayasha's face. "Then why? Why did you come for me?" The leader sighed heavily. "Because others demanded it. Because fear makes people forget the bonds of kinship and love. But I see now what your father always believed, that understanding between peoples is possible, that bridges can be built even across the widest chasms." He turned back to Jake, and this time there was respect in his ancient eyes.
"You have shown me something today, Cowboy. You have shown me that honor knows no tribe."
The tension that had hung over the desert began to dissolve like morning mist beneath the rising sun. The other warriors remained on their horses, watching with expressions that shifted slowly from hostility to curiosity. Whatever they had expected to find when they rode out that morning, this was clearly not it. The old warrior, whose name was Running Elk, gestured for the others to lower their guard. One by one, hands moved away from weapons, and the rigid formation relaxed into something almost peaceful. "I cannot undo what the council decided," Running Elk said, his voice heavy with regret. "But I can choose how to interpret their orders. They sent me to find Ayasha and determine her fate. They did not specify what that fate must be." He turned to face the gathered warriors, speaking now in his native tongue. Jake could not understand the words, but he watched the faces of the other men shift and change as Running Elk spoke. Some nodded slowly, others looked uncertain, but none raised objection when he finally fell silent. "It is decided," Running Elk announced, switching back to English. "Ayasha is free. She is no longer bound by the judgment of those who abandoned her. From this day forward, she may walk her own path." Ayasha let out a sob of relief, her body trembling against the boulder where she sat. Jake felt his own chest loosen. Tension he had not realized he was holding suddenly releasing like a rope cut free. "Thank you," Jake said, extending his hand toward Running Elk. "You have given us both a great gift today." The old warrior clasped his forearm in the traditional greeting of respect. "It is I who should thank you, Jake Callahan. You have reminded me of something I had forgotten. That the measure of a man is not found in the color of his skin or the language of his birth, but in the choices he makes when no one forces his hand." Running Elk moved toward Ayasha then, kneeling before her with the tenderness of an uncle greeting a long-lost niece. He spoke to her softly in their shared language, and though Jake could not understand the words, he saw the healing they brought. Ayasha wept openly now, tears of grief and joy mingling together as she embraced the connection to her past that she thought she had lost forever. When the moment passed, Running Elk stood and addressed his warriors once more. Two of them dismounted and approached with a leather pouch filled with water, dried meat, and medicinal herbs for Ayasha's leg. Another brought forward a horse, a beautiful painted mare with gentle eyes. For your journey, Running Elk explained, the town you seek is still a full day's ride. This will make the path easier. Jake accepted the gifts with genuine gratitude, but even as he did, his mind was working on something else. He thought about everything Ayasha had lost, everything she had suffered, and everything that lay ahead of her. He thought about his own lonely years wandering from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to call any place home.
And he thought about the confession she had whispered in his ear, the words that had changed everything.
He reached into his shirt and withdrew a small object that hung from a leather cord around his neck. It was a compass, no larger than a silver dollar, its surface worn smooth by generations of handling. The metal gleamed softly in the afternoon light, and the needle inside still pointed true despite its age. "Ayasha," Jake said, moving to kneel before her. "I have something for you." She looked at the compass with confusion. "What is this?" "It belonged to my mother," Jake explained, his voice thick with emotion. "And before her, it belonged to her mother, and her mother before that. It has been in my family for 5 generations, passed down from parent to child as a symbol of guidance and love." The warriors had grown still, sensing the significance of the moment. Even Running Elk watched with solemn attention as Jake continued. "When the fever took my family, this compass was all I had left of them. I have carried it every day since, keeping it close to my heart as a reminder of where I came from." He paused, gathering his courage. "But now I want you to have it." Ayasha's eyes widened with shock. "Jake, I cannot accept this. It is too precious. It is your only connection to your family." "No," Jake said firmly. "You are wrong. This compass has guided me through many dark nights, but it has finally led me to something I thought I would never find again. It led me to you." He pressed the compass gently into her hands, closing her fingers around its familiar weight. "From now on, wherever you go, you will always be able to find your way home. But I hope with all my heart that your home will be with me." A gasp rippled through the assembled warriors. Even Running Elk seemed moved, his weathered face softening with unexpected emotion. To give away such an heirloom was not a small gesture. It was a declaration, a promise, a binding of 2 souls together. Ayasha stared at the compass in her hands, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. When she finally looked up at Jake, her eyes held an answer that needed no words. "Yes," she whispered, "my home is with you. It has been since the moment you refused to leave me in the desert." Jake helped her rise, supporting her weight as she balanced on her good leg. Around them, the warriors began to murmur their approval, and Running Elk stepped forward to place his hands on both their shoulders. "Go in peace," he said. "Build the bridge that your father dreamed of, Ayasha. And you, Jake Callahan, take care of this precious woman. She carries the hope of 2 peoples in her heart." As they mounted the painted mare together, Ayasha leaning back against Jake's chest, the compass clutched tightly in her hand. The desert no longer seemed so harsh or unforgiving. The sun was warm on their faces, the path ahead was clear, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, the future felt full of promise. They rode toward the horizon, 2 wounded souls made whole by the unexpected gift of love.